Judith Ngangala Crispin, and I'm speaking to you today from my geodesic dome, which I've built to function as a giant camera for the making of lumichrome glass prints. You'll see today I have a little baby Joey and a little baby wombat. Their parents were both killed in the recent bushfires and they've been rescued from pouches. The process which I have invented, lumichrome glass printing, is a combination of 3 antique photography techniques. One of them is lumen printing or sun printing, which is as simple as placing an object on a piece of light-sensitive paper. The second of these techniques is cliché vert, which is the process of layering these sun prints with sheets of glass, and then objects are placed on the sheet of glass. And the last of these techniques is called chemigram, and it is a process of using photochemistry, in my case mixtures of metal salts such as copper chlorides or iron chlorides and different forms of acid, to create the detail in the images and to create detail where there isn't detail. My work is primarily centred on exploring women's relationship with country, particularly the relationship of Indigenous women with country and with the animals that occupy that country, and with dispelling the dominant narrative around death. I hope you enjoy my exhibition. The work is called The Dingo's Noctuary.
Hi, I'm Judy Stokes, and for the Auckland 2020 Festival, Gail Stington and I collaborated to produce a body of work looking at what lies beneath the fibres of life. I looked inwards, creating in-camera multiple exposures and a range of self-portraits. Gail, on the other hand, looked outwards, creating works that highlight the hope for the planet that the current changes might bring. We also created collaborative works with images from both of us in each work. We present for you Below the Surface.
Communicating Vessels is based on the life and work of surrealist and occultist Ithell Colquhoun. My work is based on a 1952 painting, La Cathédrale Engloutée. When I found this painting, I immersed myself in it. I explored its landscape and contemplated its ruins and its infinite ruin. I found myself inside the island, floating, engulfed by the liquid medium of dreams. And this is where I've placed my figures. They're overseen by ice sculptures made from New Zealand native trees.
I first came across Ethel Colquhoun while I was researching my grandfather and early 20th century Druidry. She struck me as incredibly intelligent and committed to her work as an artist and an esoteric practitioner. Her body of work that struck me most was her series of contemplative colour theory tarot cards. I wanted to see if I could take her swirling colour, maintain its simplicity and power, and bring it into my own figurative images.
So my own approach was to incorporate the automatic process upon the photonegative surface through the use of burning and scratching, which contrasts with my already quite figurative approach to photography. So communicating vessels as a whole reiterates the concept of the artist as a communicator of ideas, aims to open up a dialogue surrounding our relationship to nature, and to celebrate a female artist who still has a lot of wisdom left to impart on contemporary audiences.
Photographing people through an observational lens. I find that going to events is a useful way to be able to watch and photograph people without them necessarily being aware of you doing it. And I think that allows truths of people's personality to come through strongly. In this series, I really wanted to explore the tensions and the concepts between presented identities and private identities. These photographs were all taken at roller skating championships, both in Australia and New Zealand. I found it quite fascinating because this was an event that allowed people to wear quite elaborate costumes and makeup and really present who they were as someone who could be completely different to really the truth of who they might be. Even though I didn't personally know the people I was photographing, I found that I've created stories about who they might be and their individual histories. And through that process and also exploring further the concept of identity and changing identity in private worlds versus public worlds. I gave each of my characters their own fictitious name.
Before shooting Toreros Maya, I had little contact with the bullfight world, but in Yucatan, Mexico, I've been immediately attracted by the poetry of the popular bullfight. The popular bullfight in Yucatan is a sort of reinterpretation by the Mayas, the indigenous people of Yucatan, of the old Spanish tradition. It's quite big a party, featuring fairgrounds, games, food, drink. Here, only the first bull is killed in order to feed the audience. I decided to photograph backstage, showing the preparation of the toreros and the upraising of the tension. It was important to me to be able to photograph their intimacy. Using tight frames, I focused on details and started to play with the contrast between the roughness of the toreros and some very feminine outfits of their dress, like the pink tights. I also gave them, through the portraits taken just before to enter the arena, the opportunity to show all their pride. My photography has little to do with concept and theories. It is spontaneous. I'm looking for interesting and different perspectives. I'm always trying to suggest more than to show. I often need people's consent, and I'm quite amazed to realize that when people feel they are interesting to you, they'll open the door. I was not interested in having on board images of the fight itself, but I took a couple of pictures where we see only the torero alone in the arena, quite isolated. It was a way to speak about the loneliness of the toreros in general. In one of the pictures, you can see a man with a big bandage on his chest. He told me he got wounded a few days ago, but he didn't want to leave the arena, for he wouldn't like to abandon his boss. It tells quite a lot about loyalty in those cuadras, which is the team composed by around 6 toreros. Weeks after weeks, encounters after encounters, I started to love and respect those Mayan toreros.
Hello, my name is Ilan Wittenberg and I'm delighted to exhibit Scapes at Auckland Festival of Photography. Scapes is a collection of extraordinary places from around the world. In the next 5 minutes, you're about to see unique images in color and in monochrome. I invite you to explore these photos of magnificent nature and awesome architecture. My goal is to inspire your imagination. Enjoy the show.
Let's start our Scapes tour in Tanzania. I visited this beautiful land after winning the grand prize at Sony Alpha Awards. We stopped the car whenever there was an interesting tree with stunning cloud formation in the background. This beautiful underpass of 2 merging lanes is located in Vancouver. The final touch in creating this photo was placing the bird at the bottom. Vancouver Grand Central Library looks awesome with its surrounding columns. It resembles a Roman amphitheater. The Guggenheim Art Museum in Manhattan is a landmark 20th century architecture by Frank Lloyd Wright. I waited for traffic to stop and walked right to the middle of Fifth Avenue to create this photo just as the sun started shining on the Empire State Building. Completed in 1883, Brooklyn Bridge is an iconic symbol of New York City. It is packed with tourists, so I had to visit the bridge before sunrise. Fulton Center is a retail complex in Lower Manhattan. Security didn't like my tripod, so I had to find a blind spot to create this photo of the glorious ceiling. Catching an up-close glimpse of the grotesque creatures that guard the Notre Dame Cathedral was one of the highlights of my visit to Paris. It was a cold winter morning when I first saw Piazza del Campo in Siena, Italy. The medieval square holds magnificent horse races. This composite set is made of 9 photos looking up at the ceiling of Silo 6 in Wynyard Quarter. I love the edgy texture of the exposed concrete. This pair of giant cogwheels is located at Wynyard Wharf. It was early morning when I noticed the stunning clouds and rushed to create this photo. This old willow tree was standing in Glenorchy at the northern end of Lake Wakatipu. I love the quiet nature and the negative space in this photo. I went out early morning to see redwood forest in Rotorua. I love the leading lines and the texture of the trees. It was a race against time as I kept pouring water on the stunning Meraki boulders in a desperate effort to get some reflections just before sunset. The iconic Sky Tower is standing proud in Auckland CBD. With more than 300 meters high, it is the tallest freestanding structure in the Southern Hemisphere. I was overwhelmed with the sheer beauty of Tunnel Beach in Dunedin. The cliffs were simply majestic, and the waves were crashing with brute force. The long exposure captures beautiful motion. The waves turn into soft mist, swirling around the rocks and leaving a trail as the water recedes. This is a photo of Ross Creek Reservoir in Dunedin. I love the leading lines and the shades of green against the dramatic cloud just before sunrise. This open theatre is located in Melbourne CBD beside NGV Australia. I love the texture of the wood and the simple composition. This artwork had a single spotlight that rotated continuously. I placed the camera very low and captured the stark shadow without any distracting clutter. These remarkable rocks are located at Flinders Chase National Park in Kangaroo Island, South Australia. The large rock is about 4 stories tall. Located inside an old power station, Tate Modern is the largest art gallery in London. It holds a huge collection of modern and contemporary art. This marble sculpture of Jesus Christ, with his hand tied behind his back, was standing at the entrance to St. Paul Cathedral in London. Opened in 1972, Trellick Tower is a residential building in London that was designed in the Brutalist style by architect Erno Goldfinger. This is the courtyard of Muhammad Ali's mosque in Cairo. This iconic mosque is built inside the fort walls of Salahuddin Citadel. Made of chalk, the chicken and the egg are located at the White Desert National Park in Egypt. These massive rock formations were created by sandstorms.
Thanks for watching Scapes and enjoy the festival.
The Impact Project began when I had this visit that I was doing to Arizona, and I was visiting a landscape. My father was a geologist, and I was retracing our footsteps, thinking about what he would have talked about with me. A lot of the work is not just about geology or the landscape, but it also became about some other things that were going on in my life, like depression and some personal, things that were happening. So I chose the darkness for personal reasons, but also I think also because I was interested in, these things happened so long ago, but they also are giving out information that, scientists are using today to discover how, where we came from.
I think this series of photographs started as a sequence of what ifs. I was at the Headland Center for the Arts, casting around for ideas of projects, and walking at night, watching the waves under moonlight crash on the beach. And they would crash in such a way that as soon as they reached their peak, the moonlight would fall off of them, and all of a sudden they were a yawning chasm of black. And it was kind of frightening and exciting. And I wondered, how could I photograph that? What if I could photograph that moment of darkness? I think one of the images that crystallized this project for me, or sort of sent me off in a direction to gather more and more imagery together to make a series, was Moon Studies and Star Scratches, which is the first image run in Daylight magazine. It was photographed during an eclipse of the moon, and I went out by myself in North Carolina with a 4x5 camera and just kept moving the back of the camera around during the course of the exposure. And the camera would transcribe this kind of conversation back and forth between me and the movements of the stars, or the movements of the moon and the clouds, and things in a cosmic realm that I find so fascinating but have no way of grasping.
My name is Philip Scott Andrews, and for the past 3 years I've been working on this project, Last Days, and it's documentation of the last 7 launches of the space shuttle. My father is a photographer, and he developed years ago a remote camera system to allow people to place cameras closer to the shuttle than they could physically stand and take a picture. And so his fascination kind of rubbed off on me. When NASA announced several years at this point that they were going to wind down the space shuttle program, we got together and decided that we needed to do something on a bigger scale than just covering the launches, which is what he has been doing for so many years. This picture was actually a pretty revolutionary picture in terms of the whole evolution of the project. And I had actually been shooting some digital images with a long lens, exactly like all these photographers were. And then when the shuttle got high enough, I stepped back with my Leica and some black and white film and made this picture. It started the whole thing off for me. For other people, I hope it can serve as a sort of tribute to this program and this legacy that the U.S. is leaving behind. And I also hope it serves, in the years to come as a reminder to what we used to be able to do, and maybe as an advocacy for doing that work again.
I first arrived in northwestern Canada in 1976 when I was a few months old. My dad found a job in a coal mine in the town of Grande Cache, Alberta. It was a new town that didn't exist just a few years before we arrived. Like some of the towns that I later visited, Grande Cache was carved out of the wilderness to service a new mine. We lived at the northern edge of town. The woods literally began where our backyard ended. This wilderness was forbidding and mysterious, but it was also a place that I felt very comfortable, a place that I felt a sense of freedom. When I was old enough to understand maps, I learned that there were more towns in the vast wilderness to the north of us, connected to us by the forest, but often not accessible by road. The towns had names like Fort Chipewyan, Uranium City, Nahanni Butte, Old Crow. I was curious about them because of their names, because they were so isolated, but also because nobody could tell me anything about them. I headed north from my town for the first time more than 25 years later. I had the opportunity to travel in a very small plane with a childhood friend of mine who was working as a bush pilot. We left in the early autumn. It's a time of year which could be hot or cold, it could be snowing or sunny. People and animals are getting ready for the long winter ahead. Most of the birds have left and the bugs are gone. For the most part, it's a very quiet and peaceful time of year, but there is some pressure to keep busy because the winter could arrive any day. Sometimes it would take us days or even weeks to make our way to one of the landlocked communities. We'd be passing over forest, muskeg, mountains, glaciers, deserts. No signs of people. One of the first surprises for me was how much variety there was in the land and how often the landscape would completely change within a short distance. I also thought that the wilderness of the far north would be a harsh place, but it can be very gentle, and it has a balance that's very obvious, particularly from the air. Sometimes our GPS would take us to the general area of a town, and we still wouldn't be able to find it. When we eventually did, we would call down to the airport, and there would be no answer. Towns often seemed haunted to me, in a way, by the wilderness pressing in from all sides. The variety that I had found in the northern landscapes was also reflected in the various nations that I encountered in these towns. Dene, Cree, Gwich'in, Métis, people that had, for the most part, lived in the north for a very long time. Usually the towns don't have any lodging or restaurants, but I've always been welcomed into people's homes. In some areas, the wilderness is erasing old settlements. For the most part, it's totally unregulated by people. For example, forest fires, a natural part of this ecosystem, will burn without intervention. In other places, industrial activity, such as resource exploration, is rapidly expanding. There's a strong feeling of freedom in these northern settlements. Many people that live surrounded by the wilderness would never consider living in a city. Though I feel a deep familiarity with the wilderness, I still don't feel that I know it, and I expect to be surprised each autumn when I head north.
The project My Shadow, My Opponent came about in August of this year when I was assigned a project that was needing to be shot on the theme of balance. I came across a boxing team in Nairobi, Kenya, in the second largest slum called Kibera. What attracted me initially was less the story component of a boxing gym, more so the environment. situation and how important this place was to these few young men, and how once they were inside, they were in their own home. This is where they felt that they could wrap their wrists to be identified accordingly, and this is where they could shed those tears without fear of anyone catching a glimpse, you know. And there's the same thing I saw with these guys. I saw with a unit I was attached to in Iraq while I was embedded. There's this collective element, this collective heartbeat that at one moment or another has to disband, and it just becomes a group of individuals separated by, you know, their common space. And each one of them, as in with the soldiers in Iraq, they're at that moment they are facing off, you know, their own enemy, their own opponent.
Helping everyone see. I'm Jeff Weinstein. The practice they advertise is long gone, but two giant eyes on a rickety optometrist billboard still watch over a valley of ashes. It's a dismal place where ashes take the form of houses and chimneys and rising smoke, and finally, men who move dimly and already crumbling through the powdery air. That fictional industrial valley is the result of rapacious American greed, or so greed's impassioned witness F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote in The Great Gatsby, from which that passage was taken. As it happens, oddly similar scenes would later be illustrated and illuminated by the work of a real-life optometrist who turned photographer. The equally impassioned witness, Milton Rogovan, died January 18th at his home in Buffalo, New York, at the age of 101. Rogovan spent the last half of a long life using his camera to record those very same ashes in order to brush them away. What can this century's photography students think of such an outwardly modest man, now that art making and creativity are so bound up with career and cash? Slight cardigan-clad Rogovan sought neither money nor capital F fame. His dogged, black-and-white documentation of those he called the forgotten ones, mine workers, steel workers, Native Americans, the town and country poor of all races, especially black, could be dismissed by art world formalists as politically but not artistically important. A worthy record, sure. His negatives and contact sheets are part of the Library of Congress, yet still just record-keeping, evidence of lives that a better economy and brighter future would erase. Erase lives? No, exactly the opposite. These are regular people, and we must not abandon them in any way, the driven photographer once said. Rejecting Rogovan for his political impulse would be a tremendous mistake, and for two reasons. His individual shots, like those of photodocumentarians Jacob Riis, Dorothea Lange, and Roy de Carava, can be both potent and paradoxically exquisitely beautiful. Certain eyes know exactly how to find the diamond in the dust. But also like his predecessors, Rogovan himself stands as a tonic example, his whole enterprise a humanist slap to the faces of those who hide behind art to ignore the world. Son of Lithuanian Jewish parents who ran a dry goods store that went bust in the Great Depression, Brooklyn-born Rogovan got a degree and set up optometry shop. Soon the city's breadlines turned him, like so many angry others, toward socialist ideals. He moved upstate to Buffalo, married lifelong partner Ann Snetsky, and gave eye exams to union workers. Buffalo was then a factory town. He also joined the Buffalo branch of the Communist Party. In 1957, Rogovan refused to answer when questioned by the House Un-American Activities Committee. Was named top red in Buffalo in a newspaper headline, lost much of his business, but with new free time, took up photography. Tentative first studies were made during early trips to Mexico, and ultimately he took cameras to villages, mines, and factories in Appalachia, Zimbabwe, Spain, Cuba, China. He didn't travel lightly, Pablo Neruda wrote, when Rogovan arrived at the Chilean poet's home, quote, but he carried much more than his equipment, eyes patient and searching, a heart sensitive to light, to rain, to shadows. Yet Buffalo's east and lower west sides were Rogovan's lodestones. Black hands clasp, curl, stretch. Faces are intent on song, study, prayer, all undiminished by cracked plaster or makeshift altars. When in 1962, Storefront Churches was published in the prestigious magazine Aperture with an introduction by W.E.B. Du Bois, the photo world, at least, took notice. Its 26 images take us inside the East Side's raucous places of worship, not as intruders or voyeurs, but as silent, equal guests. Motion is made film noir expressive by use of the bare bulb strobe, shown to the 50-year-old newbie by expert Minor White. But the straight-on concern for subject that characterizes all of Rogovan's work suffuses every single shot. That's where his artistic power lies. In 2009, the photographer explained how he treated those he wanted to photograph. I never directed them or told them where to stand, how to hold their hands, or what to wear. The only thing I asked them was to look at the camera. I liked it when I saw their eyes, and that's when I knew I was ready to make their picture. When you look at these pictures, you know there was no monkey business, and that I was not sneaking around trying to steal pictures of people. He kept going back and back to Buffalo's Lower West Side to find and salute its ordinary denizens, fathers, sons, shopkeepers, mothers, daughters, bartenders, nurses, loners, lovers. Few are white, most seem poor, all were proudly recorded. An affectionate obituary in the Buffalo News includes this detail. Until last month, Mr. Rogovan, the retired optometrist and World War II veteran, even participated regularly in a weekly anti-war vigil held at Bidwell Parkway and Elmwood Avenue, holding a sign that read, "Fund health care, not warfare." Apparently, to artist and activist Milton Rogovan's credit, he was always himself.
My mother's family owned the first talkie cinema in Varanasi in India. As a child, a trip to the cinema was a big incentive. With my cousins, I would venture into the darkness of the auditorium in the middle of a screening and would be hushed into a corner by the usher. Some afternoons I sat in the manager's office and saw him receiving film cans for a new release or used ticket booklets for account keeping. I used to collect those booklets, film posters, and almost anything that was part of the theater and could be spared. In the 90s, home video became very popular in India, and cinema halls struggled for business. Many theaters, including my family's, closed down. This project is situated in the old cinema halls in India, built between 1930 and 1960. India has a long association with cinema. The first Indian feature film was made in 1899, and today the country is one of the largest film producers, making more than 1,000 films a year for an audience of over 3 billion worldwide. When I started photographing the old cinema halls, in some ways I was trying to articulate my childhood memories of the visits to the family's theater. As I explored, I got really interested in the idiosyncrasies of these spaces. These halls were mostly designed by the owners themselves, and each theater was different from the other, unlike the generic look of multiplexes. Like the unique circular window of this projector room in Regal, Kolkata. It resonates with the shape of the film reels and speaks of the owner's aesthetics. The work culture till 20 years back was very different from what we have now. A majority of people back then would retire from the same theater where they started. Over many years of being constantly occupied by the same people, these halls seem to contain cues to the psyche of these individuals who built it or who work in it. As if the space and the way it's arranged is an extension of the occupier's interior. A chair with bubbles emerging out of its upholstery, breaking the sequence in resistance. A ladder in place of the screen could be an invitation to climb out of the mundane.